Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Napoleon Bonaparte, Part 6, Divorce with Josephine, Marriage with Marie Louise Hapsburg, and the Birth of Napoleon II. We stopped last time in December of 1806. Napoleon continued his dream of world dominion. He needed the friendship with Russia. There was a revolt in Spain. He was in Warsaw, Poland. There was a reception at the palace there, and Napoleon was deciding the fate of Poland. Napoleon described the Polish lady's eyes as, quote, pools of Slavic melancholy. At this reception, he saw a woman with whom he fell in love. Her name was Countess Marie Waluska. He sent her a letter. There was no response. She was a married woman. He sent her a second letter, and he said, in the letter, he said if she would come to him, that he would help Poland. On January 1st, 1807, Napoleon met the Polish Countess Marie Kolona Waluska. She was 22 years old. Her husband was an aristocrat, 52 years older, and she became Napoleon's mistress, and I would argue the love of his life. She loved him very, very much. Napoleon wrote to Josephine that she should not come to visit him, that he was too busy. Marie Waluska was pressured by her relatives to come to Napoleon out of a national interest for Poland. Napoleon was gentle and patient with her, and she became his mistress. She was quiet and loving. Russia was open to Napoleon and his army. There were the endless steppes, snow and mud, no food. And there was an invasion. The men complained in the army. There was starvation and desertion. At the Battle of Eylau, the French and Russians both had heavy losses. After that battle, the streets were full of corpses. February of 1807. Napoleon cried. He was very sad because so many had died. In March, he wrote a letter to his wife Josephine and said, quote, I can do other things than just conduct wars, but duty comes first. The Battle of Eylau, the Grand Army was battered. It was a costly victory. The morale of the French army was shaken, and the men shouted, long live peace, bread and peace. Very tough conditions, snow, mud, and lack of food. The Battle of Eylau was a blow to Napoleon's myth of invincibility. So after that, he was at Finkenstein, at this Prussian castle, waiting for the roads to thaw. There were huge fireplaces there, and Napoleon enjoyed the company of Marie Waluska. He rested. He communicated with Persia. He promised Persia that Russia would give Georgia to Persia if Persia would push the Afghans to attack the British in India. He was also communicating with the Ottoman Empire. He planned to create a history university. And he said to the Polish Countess Marie Waluska, he said that he was an acorn who had become an oak. And with her, he was an acorn again. At the Memel River near Tilsit, there was a raft in the middle, and there was negotiations with Russia. After the victory at Friedland, Napoleon proposed peace. Napoleon talked about reestablishing the cross on the dome of the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Turkey, formerly Constantinople, Byzantine Empire. It was Greek and became Turkish. And this famous building, the Hagia Sophia, had been the center of the Eastern Orthodox Church for more than 1,000 years. And it had become a mosque, a Muslim mosque under the Turks. So this was very appealing to the Russians, since they were Eastern Orthodox Christians. This idea that Napoleon could conquer Istanbul and reestablish the Hagia Sophia as an Eastern Orthodox Christian church. Of course, that never happened. June 14th, as we said, the Battle of Friedland. French were fighting Russia. Big French victory. On June 19th, the Russian Tsar Alexander sought an armistice. Napoleon suggested the Vistula River as the natural boundary between the two empires, France and Russia. Napoleon and Alexander met in a pavilion on a barge in the middle of the Niemen River, which is now Lithuania. Napoleon had been 8 months on campaign. He was eager for peace and to return to Paris and continue with his reforms. He met with Alexander on June 25th, and he charmed the Russian Tsar. A peace treaty was signed dividing Europe between Russian and French areas of influence. Both men hated the English. The Prussian King Frederick William was there, but he had less influence. Napoleon and Alexander had late-night talks about philosophy, politics, and strategy. The peace treaty at Tilsit was signed. Prussia paid a high price for the war. Russia joined the blockade of trade against Great Britain. Alexander, the Russian Tsar, ordered anti-Napoleon literature burned in Russia. The Duchy at Warsaw was created, beginning toward Polish independence. Prussia lost a half of its population in the new treaty and a third of its territory. This created Prussian hostility. Napoleon believed he would always have British hostility, and his goal was to prevent Russia, Austria, and Prussia making war against France with the British. The Russian Tsar Alexander accepted this peace treaty with France. In their negotiations, Napoleon told a story about when he was in Egypt, that he fell asleep by an ancient wall which crumbled. And then when he woke up, in his hand was a cameo of Augustus Caesar. So again, he was comparing himself to a great ancient Roman leader. France gave Poland to Russia, which broke the promise that he had made to the Countess Marie Woluska. July 27th, he returned to Paris, 1807. He'd been absent for 306 days, the longest in his career. War in the Iberian Peninsula was coming. It really was one of the main factor in destroying Napoleon. The second biggest, aside from the later Russian disaster. It really reduced the morale in France. This war in the Iberian Peninsula, mostly in Spain. While he was absent, there was anti-Napoleon intrigue in Paris. Napoleon censored newspapers and plays. Chateaubriand compared Napoleon to Nero. In Napoleon's office, he had busts of Frederick the Great, Julius Caesar. The aristocratic families were back in the Tuileries, the Montmorencys, the Montesquieux, and the Radziwills, who were later connected to the Kennedy family in the U.S. March of 1808, Napoleon created a nobility of merit, 20% of whom came from the working classes and 58% from the middle class. This was not hereditary. Napoleon said that the French wanted equality before the law. Also in 1808, Napoleon passed the infamous decree in which he canceled debts in which the interest rate exceeded 10%. This increased hostility with the Rothschild banking family. Napoleon would spend hours in a hot bath to soothe his nerves. He had stomach pain. He had gloom. He continued to dream of worldwide power and thought of Asia and wanted to destroy the Ottoman Empire. He had impossible dreams. There was conflict with the Pope in Rome. Rome was open to English ships. Napoleon wanted to unite Italy and end the Papal States, which he did. Then he occupied Rome. His mother Letizia, who was living in Rome, was worried. Napoleon made his brother Jerome king of Westphalia, one of the German states. He was a poor king. He was lazy and a spendthrift. Napoleon was blind about this. He gave unmerited power to his brothers, which hurt Napoleon's reputation. He was growing old. He was becoming harsh. He had too much work. Still didn't have an heir. He considered divorcing Josephine, but couldn't because she was his friend. He sent for his brother Lucian. He wanted Lucian to divorce his wife and marry into nobility, and Lucian refused. Napoleon said he would live to be 90 years old, and he needed 90 years for, quote, complete consolidation of his empire. Napoleon said to Lucian that Napoleon, their brother Joseph, and Lucian would all get divorces on the same day, then marry again, all on the same day. Lucian said no. Napoleon was a slave of public opinion, which would not allow him to reconcile with his brother, recognize his own children, and marry the woman he loved. namely Marie Woluska. They had their home was Malmaison, a lovely chateau 7 miles out of Paris. Napoleon and his wife Josephine. He split time between there and the Tuileries in Paris. This Malmaison outside of Paris was 300 acres. Woods and fields, there were statues, kangaroos, flying squirrels, ostriches, and a female orangutan which would dress in a white chemise and eat turnips with guests at the table during meals. Napoleon was not particular about food. He ate the food served to him. He never got drunk. He was not a gourmand. He would spend 10 minutes eating meals. Napoleon said that time spent at the dining table was, quote, a corruption of power. He hated wasting time. He did take long, hot baths to relax and to rest. However, newspapers would be read to him, and he would dictate letters. He was universally admired by his staff as the best master they had ever had. Napoleon wanted Portugal removed from British influence, so France invaded Portugal in November of 1807. The Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil. This led to Brazilian independence. After that was an invasion of Spain, which became a disaster. There was strong Spanish resistance to French rule. At one point, Spanish peasants were shot by a firing squad. A famous painting was produced depicting this event by Francisco Goya, which is in the Prado Museum in Spain today, famous painting, and a symbol of Spanish nationalism. For Napoleon, if you are a friend of England, you're an enemy of Napoleon. And Spain was siding with England, of course, the English money and the Rothschild money behind that. So France invaded Spain. He needed someone to be king of Spain. His brother Lucian refused. Joseph, his another brother, accepted and became the new king of Spain. He was formerly the king of Naples in Italy. He was installed by Napoleon. Murat became the new king of Naples. The Spanish were proud and resisted the French invasion. Napoleon wanted Joseph, as we said, to be his brother, to be king of Spain. He later regretted that and referred to him as, quote, that fool of Joseph. It was a big mistake. When King Ferdinand returned to power in Spain, he canceled Napoleon's liberal reforms and brought back the Inquisition. There were insurrections all over Spain rebelling against the French king, Joseph Bonaparte. On June 2nd, 1808, Napoleon gave Spain its first written constitution. The Spanish people were mostly rural, illiterate, and backward. They were ultra-Catholic and reactionary. Austria was arming. War with Austria was coming. The French defeated the Spanish at the Battle of Bailén, or were defeated by the Spanish. 18,000 French troops surrendered. It was the worst French defeat since 1793. Portugal fell. For the next 5 years, the British helped expel the French from Portugal and Spain. Napoleon proposed meeting the Russian Tsar in Germany. Talleyrand, the traitor, had encouraged the invasion of Spain, and he knew it would be a disaster. Napoleon had a stormy imagination, always needing new plans. Talleyrand was communicating with the Tsar in secret. He was a traitor. No new treaty with Russia was signed. Napoleon needed a new wife, and it was important to him. He wanted an heir. It was important that his new wife would come from a royal family. Russia was becoming lukewarm toward France. September 20th, Napoleon met Alexander in Erfurt, now Germany. Talleyrand betrayed Napoleon by leaking French plans to the Russians and Austrians. Napoleon met his greatest living hero, Goethe, October 2nd, near Erfurt. And in that conversation, Napoleon complained about Voltaire's anti-Julius Caesar play, La Mort de César, because Napoleon was a great fan of Julius Caesar. So he said in Erfurt, Germany, Napoleon and Goethe, the famous author and philosopher, had a 1-hour visit. The two greatest men in the world then. Napoleon said about Goethe, quote, voilà un homme, here is a man. Napoleon had the highest respect for Goethe. Emil Ludwig said that when Napoleon met Goethe, it was like when Alexander the Great met the ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes. Napoleon said that Julius Caesar could have given great happiness to humanity, if given more time, and if he had not been assassinated by the senators in ancient Rome. Napoleon failed to come up with a Russian treaty or a Russian wife. He was unable to marry into the Romanov family. Sometimes he would be misanthropic. In other words, think human beings were evil. However, he had respect for the German spirit. He respected Tacitus. He said the Greek culture was renovated by Christianity. And although the Greeks were defeated by the Romans, they reasserted their dominance in spirit. Napoleon said that Christianity was important for the support of the state. They had a good visit, Napoleon and Goethe. Napoleon and Alexander spent 18 days together in Erfurt, but were not able to come up with a new treaty. Napoleon returned to Spain, which was a hopeless situation. On December 2nd, he was in Madrid fighting the Spanish and the British. France lost 250,000 men in Spain and Portugal. There was news that there was war coming with Austria in the east. 2 months after meeting Goethe, Napoleon was in Madrid, Spain, facing the picture of King Philip II, whom he respected. Napoleon failed to understand the wounded pride of the Spanish. He could defeat them in battle, but not win them over. He realized eventually that the Spanish invasion was a mistake. Joseph wanted to win the Spanish over with kindness, and Napoleon disagreed with that idea. He said that kings must be feared and not loved, although he was loved. On Christmas Eve, Napoleon defeated the English in Spain. There was news that there was an anti-Napoleon conspiracy in Paris. Fouché and Talleyrand and Murat were involved. So Napoleon returned to Paris. He denounced and scolded and condemned Talleyrand and Fouché. However, he did not dismiss them because he needed them. There were 250,000 troops in Spain, and Austria was preparing for war with France. So you can see he was rushing around. War in Spain, war in the east with Austria, and threats of coups d'etats in Paris. British were sending money to Austria to fight the French. Napoleon traveled from Spain to Paris in January of 1809. War with Austria was coming. Talleyrand was a traitor. Napoleon said to him, quote, "Why, you are nothing but a shit in silk stockings." Metternich was the Austrian ambassador. Napoleon communicated with him and said, quote, "Were you bitten by a tarantula? You still want to set fire to the world?" So this war with France and Austria was coming. Russia remained neutral. This disappointed Napoleon. He thought the Russians were an ally. The French defeated the Austrians in a battle, and Napoleon was wounded in his foot, his Achilles tendon. His carriage is where he worked, slept, and traveled. Peasants would see Napoleon's carriage passing by, and they believed the devil was inside. As the carriage was passing by, he would discard papers, notes, newspapers, and books, when he was finished with them. He would leave his carriage for a hot bath, which would be prepared for him. From 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. he would dictate, and 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. he would sleep. He did not want war with Austria. Saragossa fell on February 20th in Spain, and Joseph was reestablished in Madrid as the King of Spain. On April 3rd, 1809, Austria declared war on France. Bavaria was an ally with France in this new war with Austria. The French achieved victory at Aigues-Meules. Napoleon was hit in the right ankle during the battle by a spent bullet. He had a contusion. A hole was cut in his boot to reduce the pain. May 10th, he was at the gates of Vienna, 10 yards from the people. The people took off their hats and cheered him, even though he was the enemy, but they respected him and the reforms he was bringing to France and Europe. The same thing happened at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, where the people there took off their hats out of respect for Napoleon. May 13th, Vienna fell. The Battle of Aspern-Esslig, French were defeated. It was a French defeat, the first Napoleon defeat since Acre 10 years before. French soldiers dined on horse flesh there. General Lannes died. Napoleon was very sad, and Lannes was buried in the Pantheon in Paris. There was a rumor in Paris that Napoleon was mad. 6 weeks after Aspern-Essling, Napoleon sought revenge. In the French army, there were Italians, Polish, Arabs, Portuguese, Spanish, and Germans. The Battle of Lobau Island, the Battle of Wagram near Vienna on the Danube River, was the largest battle in European history, a 2-day battle. The Austrians won the first day. General Bernadotte had a poor performance and was removed from command by Napoleon. Napoleon always had a map of Europe with him. He would have colored pins which would be illuminated at night by 20 candles and a compass. This map was his altar and home. There was bad news from Spain. In Italy, Napoleon removed the political power of the Pope. He was still working to unite Italy. The Pope could only have the Vatican and 2 million francs in income. As a result, the Pope excommunicated Napoleon, and Napoleon laughed at that. The French achieved victory against Austria at Marchfeld and Wagram. The Battle of Wagram was over 2 days, and toward the end of the battle, Napoleon asked Rustum, his servant, to spread a bearskin on the ground and wake him in 20 minutes. Napoleon had his 20-minute nap and woke up rejuvenated, and the French achieved victory at Wagram. He wrote to Josephine that he was burned as brown as a berry. Then he returned to Schönbrunn and Countess Marie Waluska and spent 3 months with her. The Battle of Wagram, Napoleon spent 60 of 72 hours in the saddle. He took a 10-minute nap during the battle while 700 cannons were firing. The Battle of Wagram was the transition between the importance of cavalry to artillery. In other words, from men on horseback with guns to big guns, cannon fire. French artillery set fire to cornfields and burned the wounded to death at Wagram. It was a Pyrrhic victory because there were heavy French losses. The Austrians negotiated after Wagram, and there was peace with them for 3 years. August 15th was Napoleon's 40th birthday. He spent it with Countess Marie Waluska, who spoke little Italian or French, but loved Napoleon with her eyes. The French arrested the Pope in Italy. Napoleon was upset. He believed it was a mistake, especially in Spain. And the Spanish and English were fighting the French there. Napoleon had no long-term plans for Spain. He couldn't figure out what to do there. He was surveying and attacking. And he returned to Paris. France had the largest population in Europe in 1809. The ideas of better government were being spread by the French army. This influenced the Germans and Italians to have better government, where the peasants no longer paid feudal dues. Poland, Spain, and the Balkans were backward and resisted Napoleon's reforms. Napoleon was bringing progress, rewarding merit, and using reason. His conflict with the Pope in February of 1808 led to the French occupying the Papal States. In June of 1809, Napoleon annexed the Papal States, and the Pope excommunicated him. This increased anti-Napoleon sentiment in Spain, because they were very Catholic Christian. In July, Napoleon arrested Pope Pius. He was taken to the bishop's palace in Savona, Italy. Again, this made the war much tougher in ultra-Catholic Spain. In July, the French were defeated in Spain by the British and Spanish. On August 15th was Napoleon's 40th birthday. In October of 1809, he was in Schönbrunn. An assassin tried to kill Napoleon. He was failed and arrested. Napoleon met this man who expressed no regret. Napoleon wanted to pardon him. The man refused to ask for forgiveness and was executed. This troubled Napoleon very much. So he returned to Paris. He decided to divorce Josephine. This was very difficult. He was very sad. He wanted an heir, but Josephine never got pregnant. She was too old. Napoleon wanted a marriage with the Hapsburgs in Austria. In September 1809, he was negotiating with Austria. He considered Austria a second-rate power. He spent that summer with Marie Waluska, who became pregnant and had a son with Napoleon, whom she named Alexander, out of respect for Napoleon's hero, one of his heroes, Alexander the Great. October 12th, as we said, this Friedrich Staps attempted to assassinate Napoleon with a knife. He was a German nationalist, expressed no regret, and was executed. Napoleon wanted a male heir. November 30th, 1809, he told Josephine he wanted a divorce. He gave her Malmaison and 3 million francs a year. He wanted to marry the sister of the Russian Tsar. On December 16th, his marriage with Josephine was dissolved. However, no deal was made with the Russians, so he decided he would try to marry into the Hapsburg family, Marie Louise, the daughter of the King Francis. Napoleon was 40, Marie Louise was 18. An agreement was reached in 1810 where they would get married. They were married by proxy March 11th. He met Marie Louise on March 27th. He later would regret that marriage. It didn't prevent war with Austria. He needed to avoid war with Russia. On April 1st, 1810, Napoleon and Marie Louise Hapsburg were married at St. Cloud in Paris. There were fireworks, 3,000 legs of mutton, 1,000 sausages for the poor, hot air balloons, bread, and circuses. The Habsburg family, the royal family of Austria, was prolific. It was almost guaranteed that Napoleon, with his new Austrian wife, would give birth. Marie Louise was not beautiful, wise, brave, or passionate. Napoleon spent 5 million francs on Marie Louise's trousseau. He went hunting, hoping to lose weight, also dancing. So after marrying Marie Louise, she was soon pregnant, and Napoleon was happy that he was going to have an heir. She gave birth to a boy, Napoleon II. Big celebration. He had an heir. He felt fortified. The French had an embargo on British goods. There were exceptions. Certain raw materials, dyes needed for the French industry. English banks were failing as a result of the French embargo. There were 250,000 French troops in Spain. Spanish children were taught that Napoleon was the devil on one side of the Pyrenees Mountains. On the other side in France, French children were taught that he was God's vice-regent. 1811 was the start of a 2-year European economic crisis connected to the trade embargo with Great Britain. There was unemployment and food shortages. France and Russia were preparing for war. March 20th, 1811, Marie Louise gave birth to Napoleon Francois Joseph Charles, or Napoleon II, and Napoleon adored his son. In the Napoleonic era, great art was produced, propaganda for France, including Jacques-Louis David's Napoleon and Crossing the Alps. Napoleon admired ancient Greece and Rome and favored classical architecture. He was a great patron of the art. In Spain, there were few regular Spanish troops. It was a guerrilla war, very challenging. The Dutch were angry about the embargo with England because it created business losses. His brother Louis, King of Holland, abdicated in the throne there and fled because of the anger about the policies that were hurting the businessmen there. He was found in Austria. He settled in Graz, where he wrote 3 volumes regarding a love affair with a woman named Marie, and this frustrated Napoleon. January of 1811, the French army in Spain was starving. They were deserting and marauding. Sweden offered their throne to French General Bernadotte. The Russians were preparing for war. France had the largest European empire since ancient Rome. Tsar Alexander's grandmother was Catherine the Great. Russia had long-standing ambition to be a major European power. Joseph wanted to abdicate the throne in Spain. Napoleon refused to accept that. Joseph's brother-in-law, Bernadotte, became the crown prince in Sweden. Napoleon regretted having his brothers become kings in Europe. Napoleon was happy about the birth of his son. He gave a scarab pin from the tomb of an Egyptian king, a talisman. He gave that to Schwarzenberg, the Austrian envoy who helped arrange his marriage with Marie Louise Hapsburg. Napoleon believed that the birth of his son removed him from danger. He was 41 years old and finally had an heir, a son. He planned to defeat Wellington in Spain. Marie Louise, at this time, who was born Austrian, considers herself French. She was learning how to ride a horse. Napoleon was patient with her. He waited for Marie Louise if she was late for dinner. However, their marriage did not help improve relations with Austria. Napoleon was in conflict with the Pope. Europe was divided in the conflict, those who supported Napoleon and those who supported the Pope. The people in the Papal States supported Napoleon. They were happy to accept the Code Napoleon, better government there. Napoleon met Catholic clergy in Holland and berated them. He said he would not kiss the Pope's toe. He was expanding the French Navy in the Atlantic and Mediterranean and continuing his dream of world conquest. He wanted to take India and defeat England. He wanted the Russian Tsar conciliated or killed, and a new dependent on the throne in Russia, in Moscow, controlled by Napoleon. War with Russia was coming. The Russian Tsar refused further involvement with the trade embargo with Great Britain. The Russian Tsar believed the Russian climate would be a big help in the coming war against France, and he was right. Great Britain from 1793 to 1812 had kidnapped 15,000 American sailors from American ships to fight against France. This led to the War of 1812 between the United States and Great Britain. They called that impressment. Nathan Rothschild was single-handedly financing the British war against Napoleon. He funded Wellington's army and the British allies. Without Rothschild money, war against Napoleon would have been impossible. The Rothschilds had a limitless fortune. Napoleon said that Europe was like an old woman. The French army had 800,000 men. Napoleon was imposing his will on Europe. He wanted to create a United States of Europe. Talleyrand was communicating with the Russian Tsar about France's war preparations. He was a traitor. Napoleon said that victory against Russia was essential. Well, that concludes today's presentation. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.